Making headlines for this week of September the 11th, the crisis of ISIS. Like its previous incarnations after 9/11, latest terror threat continues to be exposed for what it really is. The Syrian story, why Syrian refugees and why now, after so many years. Interpreting China, are financial actions a collapse of the old or a birth of the new? And crazy about cannabis, Rick Simpson speaks out on cannabis, the oil, the plant, the laws, and the craziness.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. Today is the 14th anniversary of 9/11, and ironic is it not that another campaign of fear is underway in an attempt to justify further global interventions and conflicts. These days, there is an almost endless supply of information, videos, audio clips, pictures, documentaries, and more that present evidence disproving the official report of events from that day. The mysteries are plentiful, but thanks to the mainstream media, if a story is told loudly enough, often enough, and for a lengthy period of time, the people will be begging to accept the information as truth. 3 buildings collapse from fire-related damage into their own footprints, which is statistically impossible. Prior to 9/11, no large building had ever collapsed due to structural damage resulting from fire, nor has a building collapsed in the same way since that time. There was no physical evidence of an airplane in Pennsylvania on 9/11. It was only a hole in the ground. Evidence is also showing that a plane did not crash into the Pentagon, but the hole in the wall suggested that it was a missile, not a plane, since there was no damage to the building from where the wings should have hit the building. There is some video evidence, if one looks for it, to suggest that it was not even a plane that hit the towers, but it appeared more to be a holographic image, as the shadow appears to enter the building without shattering glass, followed by the explosions inside and the subsequent explosions that destroyed the interior structure, causing it to fall down into its own footprint exactly like a controlled demolition. A BBC reporter is viewed reporting on the collapse of Building 7 20 minutes before it falls, and the owner of the World Trade Center complex, Larry Silverstein, who took out an extensive insurance policy on the buildings about 6 months earlier, called for the building to be pulled, a demolition term. Numerous highly credible people from many professional backgrounds, including military people like retired General Stubblebine, have brought their knowledge and expertise to the public in the hopes of finally getting the truth revealed, more particularly to the people of North America, as they are primarily the ones who still believe the official story. While the Western media and Western governments attempt to maintain the lies and deceptions surrounding the event, what they are also keeping hidden is something else from the world that would conflict with the Western agenda of blaming Russia for what happened in Ukraine. The Teardrop Memorial was donated as a gift to the people of the U.S. from the people and government of Russia as their gift of solidarity to the country. What is different now, however, 14 years later, is that there is also a greater global campaign for human and planetary compassion as more and more people are seeing through the lies of Western media and Western propagandist governments, and they are questioning more, sharing more, having more compassion, and are speaking out more. The efforts of this global cabal are being diffused more and more as courageous people are stepping up in response to the cries of humans around the world to share what they know, or do whatever they can do to help move humanity and our planet forward. Unfortunately, this global cabal is still trying with whatever they have left. What is happening around the world, and especially in the Middle East, but with repercussions in Europe, is either directly or indirectly linked to the events of 9/11. Retired U.S. General Wesley Clark has been speaking out in the past about what he knows and remembers not only from around 9/11, but also several relevant conversations with higher military brass during the 1990s. The following is an excerpt from Fora TV.
What happened in 9/11 is we didn't have a strategy, we didn't have bipartisan agreement, we didn't have American understanding of it, and we had instead a policy coup in this country. Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us. I went through the Pentagon 10 days after 9/11. I couldn't stay away from Mother Army. I went back there to see Don Rumsfeld. I'd worked for him as a White House fellow in the 1970s. All this is in the book. I went downstairs. I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know. I said, well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, no. He said, but I guess they don't know what to do about terrorism, but they can attack states, and they want to look strong, and so I guess they think if they take down a state, it will intimidate the terrorists. And, you know, it's like that old saying, he said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem has to be a nail. Well, I walked out of there pretty upset. And then we attacked Afghanistan. I was pretty happy about that. We should have. And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, oh, sir. He says, it's worse than that. He pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office that says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. I said, 7 countries in 5 years. I said, is that a classified memo? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. He was about to show it to me. He said, because I want to talk about it. And I sat on this information for a long time, for about 6 or 8 months. I was so stunned by this, I couldn't begin to talk about it. And I couldn't believe it would really be true, but that's actually what happened. These people took control of the policy in the United States. And I realized then, it came back to me, a 1991 meeting I had with Paul Wolfowitz. You know, in 2001, he was Deputy Secretary of Defense, but in 1991, he was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. It's the number 3 position in the Pentagon. And I had gone to see him when I was a 1-star general. I was commanding the National Training Center. I had met him one time. He said, if you ever get to Washington, come look me up. They always say that. Well, I was there in Washington. It was a Friday afternoon. I'd visited Colin Powell. He'd given me 5 minutes of his precious time and sent me on my way, and I was bored in the Pentagon. And I thought, I'll just go, who can I see? I think I'll see Wolfowitz. So I called, and up there, he was available. Scooter Libby came to the door. I met Scooter for the first time, and he brought me in. And I said to Paul, I said, and this is 1991, I said, Mr. Secretary, you must be pretty happy with the performance of the troops in Desert Storm. And he said, well, yeah, he said, but not really. He said, because the truth is we should have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein, and we didn't. And this was just after the Shia uprising in March of 91, which we had provoked, and then we kept our troops on the sidelines and didn't intervene. And he said, but one thing we did learn, he said, we learned that we can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us. He said, and we've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes, Syria, Iran, Iraq, before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld, and you could name a half dozen other collaborators from the Project for a New American Century. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. It went back to those comments in 1991. Now, did anybody ever tell you that? Was there a national dialogue on this? Did senators and congressmen stand up and denounce this plan? Was there a full-fledged American debate on it? Absolutely not. And there still isn't.
His comments clearly suggest that there was some kind of controlling agenda going back to the 1990s at the very least. According to a WashingtonsBlog.com posting last February 20th, the U.S. has been at war 93% of the time during its existence. apparently 222 out of 239 years. Not exactly a proud or justifiable statistic of a country claiming to represent peace and democracy in the world. As this global cabal has rolled out one campaign of fear after another, attempts have been made to rebrand, remarket particular groups as alleged threats, when in fact the threats are coming more from the people, the groups, and the countries that created these alleged threats in the first place. A report put out by Truth in Media explores the origins of the group ISIS.
The name ISIS is one that every American knows by now. The biggest threat to our national security since Al-Qaeda, right? They are a brutal, savage group known for public beheadings and mass executions. They are the face of the new war on terror. Right now, the U.S. military is conducting airstrikes in Syria in a supposed attempt to take out ISIS targets. Meanwhile, the White House and military leaders are talking about possible boots on the ground in Iraq again, only 3 years after the war in Iraq was declared over. In fact, this war, according to former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, could last for decades. So who exactly is ISIS? And where did they come from?
It's entirely a creation of the United States' behavior in Iraq. That's how we got to where we are, because of war, because of occupation, because of torture.
For answers, we traveled to Los Angeles to meet with Angela Keaton, the founder of antiwar.com.
We destabilized and wrecked Iraq. I mean, it caused it to fail miserably, and that's entirely the responsibility of the United States government. There's no one else at fault there. I mean, as horrible as Saddam Hussein was, Iraq was not unstable. It was a functioning country as much as those sorts of things go, and was not a particularly horrible hellhole if you were a religious minority.
To understand where ISIS comes from, you have to understand two storylines. The first is what Keaton just said. When the U.S. first went into Iraq, we blew the country apart. We destroyed the government, toppled Saddam Hussein, destroyed infrastructure, and most importantly, left behind a power vacuum, one that would have never have existed had Hussein not been overthrown by the U.S. government. Daniel McAdams with the Ron Paul Institute says this is an historical fact that media just won't discuss.
All of this has to do with U.S. action in the region, which destroyed the infrastructure, which destroyed Iraqi society, which destroyed the government. You had a lot of people who lived under Saddam Hussein, who may not have been as happy as larks. Nevertheless, they were living somewhat normal lives. The U.S. put a government in power in Baghdad that all of a sudden was their enemies, that treated them very, very badly.
Now that is the easy part of the story. The U.S. created conditions in Iraq where ISIS could get its start. But here's the other storyline that you have to understand, that even with Saddam gone, ISIS still couldn't have risen to power had it not been for what happened next. ISIS actually began as a small insurgent group in Iraq in 2006. They had no money, no real ability to recruit, but they did work to create very limited problems for the U.S. military. It wasn't until 2009 that ISIS shifted its focus from Iraq, where it was largely unsuccessful in developing a foothold, and focused on the civil war in Syria. Even there, ISIS struggled to gain any foothold, because the two largest groups fighting against President Bashar al-Assad were al-Nusra Front, or al-Qaeda, and the Free Syrian Army. Then came a pivotal moment that most Americans aren't even aware of. In June of 2013, a northern general for the Free Syrian Army spoke out on Al Jazeera, Qatar, and stated that if international forces did not send weapons, the rebels attempting to overthrow Syrian President Bashar al-Assad would lose their war in just 1 month. Politicians like Senator John McCain demanded action.
So it's a totally unfair and unbalanced fight, and we've got to turn this thing around.
So what happened? Well, within just a matter of weeks of that Syrian general making his plea for international help, the U.S., the Saudis, Jordan, Qatar, Turkey, and Israel began providing weapons and training and money to the so-called rebel Free Syrian Army. By September of 2013, American media outlets, including CNN and the Washington Post, were reporting that CIA-funded weapons had begun flowing to Syrian rebels. The weapons were not American-made, but funded and organized by the CIA. But where it all fell apart, weapons that the U.S. insisted would be used by freedom fighters would be, in less than 1 year, in the hands of ISIS fighters. So where were these fighters coming from? Actually, from the Free Syrian Army, the group that John McCain insisted would help the U.S. to overthrow Assad. That same group actually giving weapons, selling weapons, and sending fighters to join with this new group called the Islamic State. It was in June of 2014 when suddenly, after being a no-name group in Syria, that ISIS emerged, heavily armed and trained by U.S. and coalition special forces, making a dramatic entrance by crossing back over the Syrian border into Iraq, capturing Mosul and much of the northern part of the country. One of the most important facts that mainstream media ignores time and time again is that ISIS was able to grow so fast because of all the U.S. military equipment they were able to seize, equipment that our military left in Iraq, truckloads of Humvees, tanks, and weaponry that instead of taking or destroying, the U.S. government simply decided to leave behind. Even when the U.S. government knew that ISIS fighters were capturing that equipment, we did nothing. Why?
How is it the U.S. had no idea that this threat was coming? How many billions did we spend? Maybe $100 billion on the total intelligence community budget over the year. If this was such a threat, as John McCain and Lindsey Graham are fond of reminding us, how is it that it was missed so unbelievably, so egregiously?
Also bringing information into the light about 9/11, the false flag wars resulting from 9/11, and various crises unfolding now, is Sibel Edmonds. She was a former FBI translator, fluent in Turkish, Farsi, and Azerbaijani, and because of extensive knowledge of classified information, she was gagged from speaking out. Despite this, she has continued to speak out, and in an interview on the Lou Rockwell show, she shares some information that puts the U.S. squarely to blame for the creation of ISIS and subsequently the refugee crisis now facing Europe.
Sibel Edmonds is one of those polymaths on foreign affairs and intelligence matters, but today we're going to talk about what the empire is doing in Turkey, in the Kurdish areas, and in that part of the world, and why ISIS is not some terrorist group that sprung up out of the soil just by magic, but was actually a creation of the U.S.
Well, you hit the highlight of the issue, the topic of what has been happening in Turkey, with Syria, with the what they call the Kurdish issue. And yes, the empire has been very successful, highly successful, to maintain the divide and chaos in the region for the ultimate purpose of dominance in the region. And for that, of course, it has been playing various chess pieces, and many of these chess pieces are part of the empire side, not as it is being talked about in the mainstream media as either independent actors such as ISIS or Assad's regime per se.
And of course they've murdered an unbelievable number of people in Syria, and the people that the U.S. is supporting to overthrow Assad and company have promised that they're going to ethnically cleanse the few remaining Christians who have lived successfully in Syria since the time of the apostles. Many of them already pushed out. They'll push out the remainder and probably kill many more. And they also intend to kill all the Alawites. It's the Muslim sect that Assad and his family belong to. So there's going to be much more blood on the empire's hands, but I guess they like it. They must get a charge out of it.
Absolutely. Lately, I have been using the term I coined. I call it ISIS or us, because it is. And this is not any kind of a speculation or conspiracy theory. Between October and December of 2011, at a BFP report, Boiling Frogs Post, we broke exclusive news story about U.S. NATO forces in southern Turkey. U.S. has a base. It's called Incirlik Base. It's in southern Turkey. It's close to the Syrian border. And that the fact that based on sources in Turkey, and these include the military sources in Turkey and two sources here with U.S. military, we broke the story about how the United States NATO Turkish forces were bringing in these factions from Syria into the base, training them, military training, arming them, and then funneling them back into Syria for the purpose of creating this chaos and also this entire opposition to Assad. Well, whatever they say today and whatever the U.S. media is saying is absolutely contrary to the facts, to the truth. These are the people we trained for this exact purpose. It started as ISIL and then became ISIS, now short IS. These are the people, many of them, thousands of them. We, United States, together with NATO forces and Turkish, with the cooperation of the Turkish forces, we brought them into Turkey, we trained them, we armed them, and we funneled them back into Syria. So now they are trying, the media and the United States, the Western world, they are trying to distinguish between ISIS and some real opposition to Assad in Syria. And then, of course, there's this faction, the question of the Kurdish faction there, who have been also armed and trained by the United States, who are saying that they are fighting against ISIS, but actually ISIS is on our side. So you are looking at this complete chaos and mess that was artificially designed per plans and put in place for the ultimate goal of moving forward with the imperial pursuits. Yet when you look at the media and what they are being fed, we are looking at a replacement brand for Al-Qaeda. In fact, this is what I have been talking about, writing about lately. This is changing one brand to another brand. It's all about marketing, and it exhibits main marketing features in it. When one brand starts losing its reach and its power, sometimes you change your logo, you rebrand your product or what you're doing, your service. And that's exactly what we have been doing with this phenomena called ISIS. And if you look at the marketing scheme, it's not different. In fact, it is identical to the marketing promotional methods that we practiced, the United States, together with its arm in the media with Al-Qaeda.
A 15-minute video explaining cognitive dissonance and why people are afraid of 9/11, dating back to October of 2012, was discovered close to airtime, and I was unable to prepare it for the newscast. The link to this video will appear in the show summary. I have not yet had an opportunity to review the video, so as usual, I advise the use of your own discernment as you view it. Abby Martin, who stepped away months ago from her position of host of the RT program called Breaking the Set to pursue more investigative journalism, has returned to the airwaves. The following are excerpts from her debut program focusing on exposing the empire that the United States has become.
Throughout its history, America's leaders have echoed the mantra that it is a beacon of freedom and equality, that its actions abroad are based on democracy and morality, and that it's the greatest country on earth. America's actions, we've been told, have been for the greater good, that its citizens are in this together, united under the banner of one nation under God. But history tells a different story. When we think of empire, we think of ruthless civilizations like Rome, where an emperor class reigns supreme over the masses, brazenly conquering and enslaving their neighbors. But these feudal remnants linger still today, and despite the trappings, the core system of empire remains. As colonialism advanced, empires swallowed up the last indigenous lands. Most egregiously at the Berlin Conference in 1884, European superpowers sat down at a negotiating table and divided up Africa for themselves, eviscerating the last bastion of autonomy on the continent. But as empires expanded, their appetite grew bigger than the planet. The feeding frenzy came to a head in 1914, when the rulers of competing empires led 17 million people like cattle to the slaughter. In the midst of the global massacre, empires continued to redraw the world for themselves. Under the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, the UK and France drew their own borders in the Middle East, deciding the fate of millions and showing how arbitrary borders really are. Their unquenchable thirst for power and profit led the empires to clash again barely 20 years later, with unspeakable horrors claiming the lives of 60 million human beings. culminating with the most catastrophic weapon the world has ever seen. The use of the atomic bomb against the civilian cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a defining act of terror that cemented America's standing as military supreme. And from then on, it cast its shadow as the new reigning empire. The centers of the world's powers were left decimated, except one. And the victor built a new order under its hegemony. A club of empires formed in its aftermath, united against a common enemy, self-determination. In 1949, the U.S., Canada, and 10 European states formed NATO, insisting it was a defensive alliance. Yet NATO has carried out a strategy of containment through countless wars of aggression.
For Saddam Hussein, possession of the world's most deadly weapons is the ultimate trump card, the one he must hold to fulfill his ambition.
Organizations like the UN give the facade of civilized diplomacy and legality, but time and again it's shown that military might trumps morality. The U.S. routinely breaks international laws and treaties with no repercussions from the international body. And when it needs UN backing for illegal wars, well, it just bullies its members for endorsement. Intervention after intervention, this growing empire has subverted the democratic processes of dozens of countries, undermined the people the world over, and installed countless dictators loyal to its will. War after war, it has swallowed up or attempted to destroy any land that has not capitulated to its demands. Even within their own borders, in cases where its own people dissented, the empire deployed the military against them. Incidentally, every intervention seems to follow a similar trend. In Latin America alone, the U.S. military has intervened 56 times to determine the destiny of other nations. Like days of old, the empire only unleashes its military to protect its own power and wealth. It uses it as a battering ram for its economic policies and deploys a transnational corporate capitalist power structure which prioritizes profit over the welfare of the planet. Through extortion and subjugation, organizations like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have created new forms of debt slavery and colonialism. All U.S. Marines learn about Major General Smedley Butler, who at the time of his death in 1940 was the most decorated Marine in U.S. history, winning 5 medals for heroism. But what Marines aren't told is that Butler became one of the most outspoken critics of U.S. militarism. He said, "War is just a racket. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of the people. Only a small inside group knows what it's about. It's conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the masses." I served in all commissioned ranks from second lieutenant to major general, and during that period I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Mexico safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefits of Wall Street. And I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. In China, I helped to see it that Standard Oil went its way unmolested. 9/11 presented another golden opportunity for the empire. It exploited fear and tragedy to pillage resources across the Middle East. Its threat clear: conform to our rule or face destruction. At home, the empire ensured a permanent war economy by institutionalizing the collusion between government and big business. In 2008, the Government Accountability Office found that a startling 52 of the biggest defense contractors employed over 2,400 former generals, senior executives, and officers. A whopping 70% of the top generals who retired between 2009 and 2011 stepped directly into positions in the defense industry. Lobbying for war is even more blatant. Of the top 10 corporate PAC donors in 2015, half were defense contractors and war profiteers. And what do you know? Turns out that the top 4 politicians with the most authority over defense spending are also the top 4 recipients of defense behemoth Lockheed Martin. The bedrock of America is the myth of democracy, that somehow empire will dismantle itself if the right leaders are elected. Then we can just go back to what the founding fathers intended this country to be. But America was founded on colonization, the extermination of an indigenous population, and the enslavement of an entire race, all of which laid the foundation to its rise to empire. At home, the empire rots. Economic warfare abounds. In the richest country in human history, millions sit in poverty. Militarized riot cops stalk with impunity. Racism entrenched. The surveillance state spies unhinged. And political opposition incessantly quashed.
In early June, Seamus Milne, writing for the London Guardian, released details of British involvement in reporting that the War on Terror, that campaign without end, launched 14 years ago by George Bush, is tying itself up in ever more grotesque contortions. On Monday, the trial in London of a Swedish man, Berlin Gildo, accused of terrorism in Syria, collapsed after it became clear that British intelligence had been arming the same rebel groups the defendant was charged with supporting. The prosecution abandoned the case, apparently to avoid embarrassing intelligence services. The defense argued that going ahead with the trial would have been an affront to justice when there was plenty of evidence the British state was itself providing extensive support to the armed Syrian opposition. Milne also added that in reality, U.S. and Western policy in the conflagration, that is now the Middle East, is in the classic mold of imperial divide and rule. American forces bomb one set of rebels while backing another in Syria and mount what are effectively joint military operations with Iran against ISIS in Iraq while supporting Saudi Arabia's military campaign against Iranian-backed Houthi forces in Yemen. However, confused U.S. policy may often be, a weak, partitioned Iraq and Syria fit such an approach perfectly. What's clear is that ISIS and its monstrosities won't be defeated by the same powers that brought it to Iraq and Syria in the first place, or whose open and covert war-making has fostered it in the years since. Endless Western military interventions in the Middle East have brought only destruction and division. It's the people of the region who can cure this disease, not those who incubated the virus. Sputnik News, in an article on September the 10th, reported on a German media source indicating the defeat of ISIL without the help of Moscow and Tehran is near impossible. The article writes that up until now, all efforts were in vain. Still, there is a possibility of new talks that would have a greater chance of success than those conducted over the past 4 years. In the agreement on Iran's nuclear deal, Russia played a productive role with regard to the development of the document. Reaching an agreement with Tehran would give a new impetus to efforts related to the search for a solution on Syria. The Europeans, Americans, Russians, as well as many Arab states are united in their priority to bring an end to Islamic State. The areas that are controlled by Islamic State are now ruled by barbarism. Objectively, Russia and Iran are allies of the West in the war against Islamic State, and this war cannot be won without the help of Moscow and Tehran, D. Zeit writes. Which part of the U.S. that wants to stop ISIS is perhaps the key question. There is another important link to keep in mind when considering all the geopolitical conflicts in the Middle East. Although the evidence is pointing predominantly in the direction of the U.S., we must also consider the silent, wealthy benefactor of U.S. actions in the Middle East, and this is the Zionist government of Israel and its powerful lobby group that strongly influences, if not directly controls, much of the U.S. Congress and Senate. There is a pattern in the Middle East for those willing to look for it. If we look at countries like Libya, Egypt, Syria, Turkish Kurdistan, Iraq, and Afghanistan, none of these countries are U.S. allies. Some of them contain oil, some drugs, or in the case of Egypt, it is a strategic location along the Suez Canal. and all were targeted for some kind of an attack, resulting either in civil war or the installation of a puppet leader. Other countries, like Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait, all of them allies of the U.S., however, have no presence whatsoever of ISIS, and some of these countries also have oil. The tactics that have been described above have been used more recently on Ukraine and its people. A government has been installed that is no longer treating the people well, nor is this government truly interested in making their country good, healthy, peaceful, and safe for its people again. Continuing on with geopolitical news related more directly to this alleged crisis that is being targeted at Syria, there are many battles on many levels, across many borders, and marketed by many messages that are seeking to maintain the confusion, and thus this contributes at least partially to the torn emotions being felt by the people of the world towards what is happening in Syria. When emotions are running high, taking a moment to step back and reflect before reacting is generally not the first thing that comes to people's minds. We are witnessing an event, but it is an event that has been going on for a very long time. Why is it suddenly being thrust into the global spotlight once again is not exactly clear, but one can be certain that there is a reason for it. At the end of last week's newscast, I commented about the importance of not only helping fellow humans in need, but also that this help must also come with a concerted global call to expose the leaders and the governments that are behind the root cause of why this crisis happened in the first place. As we witness more and more things happening that suggest the transition to a new global financial paradigm is upon us, we can also begin to see how those who are desperately hanging on to the old paradigm are trying to use any tactic they can come up with to try to stall or delay the inevitable end of fiat currencies and the US dollar as a global reserve currency. Two of the key questions might be, why suddenly is this a Syrian refugee crisis? And also, why now? Earlier, retired General Clark noted that Syria was one of the countries targeted for invasion. It is known that Syria was one of the last remaining few countries that did not have a Rothschilds-controlled central banking system, and, like other leaders not willing to play the game of the global cabal, Bashar al-Assad appears to be targeted for similar reasons. On September the 4th, the German news media website Deutsche Welle reported Russian President Putin as blaming the U.S. for the refugee crisis. A Sputnik news article on the same day reported that while the U.S. continues its operation in Syria aimed at toppling the Assad regime, the Syrian president is taking Russia's advice and using diplomacy to end the crisis in his country. Speaking to journalists in Vladivostok, President Putin said Assad is willing to hold snap parliamentary elections and share power with the quote-unquote healthy opposition. A political solution to the Syrian crisis, which Russia has insisted on for a long while, seems to be prevailing over that of a military one, pursued by the U.S. and its allies. Taking steps to assist Syria, however, it was reported also by Sputnik News on September the 6th that Vladimir Putin criticized Western foreign policy in the Middle East, but is ready to cooperate with the U.S. to establish peace in the region. This according to German newspaper Deutsche Wirtschaftsnachrichten. According to the newspaper, Putin's rhetoric could mean that he is going on the offensive in the Syrian conflict by saying that Moscow is ready to help Western countries in the fight against the Islamic State. However, he also claimed that the West was not without its share of the blame for the conflict. In Russia, we have several years ago said that if our so-called Western partners conduct erroneous policies in regions of the Muslim world, in the Middle East and North Africa, this will lead to large-scale issues, Putin said on September the 4th. A commentary written by Dr. Patrick Slattery, appearing on the davidduke.com website, goes a little bit further. Slattery writes that, of course, the Zionist fanatics in Israel and Washington wanted to weaken a Syrian state that they see as an enemy, and of course they want to preoccupy Iran's ally Bashar Assad in order to clear the way for a war against Iran. But massive immigration into European countries is also a top priority for Zionist fanatics, and the war in Syria has created millions of new pawns that can be sacrificed in order to further undermine Europe's demographic future. Moreover, the Middle Eastern governments responsible for financing ISIS and allowing foreign fighters to infiltrate Syria and Iraq are all 100% kosher client states with a long history of cooperating with Zionist interests: Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar, and Turkey. Lyndon LaRouche, writing on the LaRouche PAC news blog site, believes U.S. President Obama is walking into Putin's Syria trap. While Washington blows steam about not allowing Russian intervention to support the Syrian government, LaRouche writes that Putin has already decided to intervene to preserve the Syrian state and the Assad government. Russian military advisors are already in the country, and more advanced Russian military equipment is coming into Syria, aimed at enabling the Syrians to launch a full-scale conventional war against the Islamic State. According to one U.S. source, Russian surveillance drones are already mapping out territory held by ISIS and Nusra Front and other Western-backed rebel groups. Increasingly, Obama will be faced with exposure for backing ISIS or capitulating to the Russian operations. Either way, Putin has made his decision and will not back down, LaRouche emphasized. Putin has decided to wipe out ISIS, and Obama can't handle that. One might also argue that this could be exactly the plan being carried out by both Putin and Obama, as they both try to destabilize and ultimately destroy the power of the global cabal and those in Washington. If Obama is moving the U.S. away from its relationship with Israel, Obama will require outside help, the kind of help that can be offered by Russia and China. Another article on the LaRouche website, dated the same day, adds the following. Former head of NATO Military Committee from 2002 to 2005, General Harold Kujat, stated, as on Radio Berlin Brandenburg, "It is my personal opinion that we should attempt to forge a grand alliance with Russia to stop the war in Syria, and that means the West should, in fact, work together with the Russians." The 21st Century Wire.com news website wrote the following on September the 7th. "The only world leader speaking sense on the migrant crisis is the same one who is also subject to an international demonization campaign." The article added that Putin highlighted the necessity to find out what is happening and what to do next, while branding Western policies as short-sighted. He also noted that the U.S. was not feeling any impact at all from the current crisis, despite playing a huge role in creating it. As has been characteristic of late within the German parliament, another German MP with the Left Party is speaking out. In an interview with Democracy Now!, Annette Groth, spokesperson for human rights with the Left Party, had this to say.
The thing is, I listen carefully to the news. I mean, what is the root for this massive migration? It is war, it is terror, and it is the former U.S. government who is accountable for it, and the NATO state governments. I'm very sorry to say so, but it is the truth. It was Bush who invaded Iraq. It was Bush, then Libya, destroying Libya, then Syria. Now Saudi Arabia, with the help of German weapons, is invading Yemen. This is the next country, where we will receive refugees. The whole area, the Middle East, is torn by war and terror. So therefore, people are leaving their countries.
It was back in 2013, on February 21st, when Craig Murray, a former ambassador and human rights activist, wrote on his blog page the following. Israel has granted oil exploration rights inside Syria in the occupied Golan Heights to Genie Energy. Major shareholders of Genie Energy, which also has interests in shale gas in the United States and shale oil in Israel, include Rupert Murdoch and Lord Jacob Rothschild. For Israel to seek to exploit mineral reserves in the occupied Golan Heights is plainly illegal in international law. Murray also states that Israel tried to make the same move 20 years ago, but was forced to back down after a strong reaction from the Syrian government, which gained diplomatic support from the United States. Israel is now seeking to take advantage of the weakened Syrian state. This move perhaps casts a new light on recent Israeli bombings in Syria. Again, this was from 2013. So the events that have been unfolding in Syria have been occurring over a long period of time, which leads to the question of why Western media has promoted this to international headlines once again. One may ask why Muslims are not helping Muslims. An article on the freepatriotpost.com website on September the 11th had reported that Saudi Arabia has some 100,000 tents, along with kitchens and bathroom facilities, sitting idle in the desert while Europe is dealing with a refugee crisis. These tents are used for about 5 days a year during the annual Hajj pilgrimage, but the rest of the year they sit empty. They are permanent construction and even fireproof, but they sit empty. As Europe is criticized for not taking in enough refugees, the wealthy Arab nations take in 0 refugees. Lebanon, which has taken in a quarter of its population, has accepted the most refugees of any Arab state. The situation is only going to get worse, and for the Middle Eastern nations to turn a blind eye to the problem and let Europe deal with it is not the solution. Real action on the part of Middle Eastern nations to take part in these fellow Muslims is needed, and action to stop the fighting and terrorism that are driving these people from their homes is also needed. Some listeners may know of an online blogger, allegedly from Syria, known as Syrian Girl. She has apparently risen to internet stardom for her insights of what is apparently happening within the country. On a recent video log posting, she had this to say.
This is Syrian Girl. The media is painting the refugee crisis as an acute issue, but the Syrian war and refugees have been there for 4 years. And Aylan wasn't the first child refugee to drown. Last month, an 11-year-old Syrian girl drowned off the coast of Egypt. So why is there such a media push now? Well, it's just in time for when France, Britain and Australia were asked to join the US's war on Syria. In fact, the US asked Australia to join its coalition a week before Aylan died. So they're using sympathy for this child's death to drop bombs on more children while crying crocodile tears over them as they run from those bombs. Just look at this headline from The Sun. Bomb Syria for Aylan. You'd think they'd make themselves less obvious. This is the city that Aylan comes from. The area was bombed to smithereens by the US. Rupert Murdoch couldn't even wait for Aylan's body to go cold before he started exploiting it for more war in Syria. Turkey is also causing the refugee crisis to push for the creation of a buffer zone in Syria as part of their continued attempt at regime change. So, before you wave refugees welcome while letting your government get away with murder, there are a few things you need to know. The whole Syrian war and refugees were caused in the first place because the US and NATO backed Islamist rebels in Syria in 2011. In spite of this, politicians and the mass media are blaming the Syrian President Assad for Europe's entire refugee crisis and using that to convince people that there needs to be a war in Syria. But how can Assad be blamed for the entire refugee crisis when the majority of refugees aren't even Syrian, but either poor immigrant workers or refugees from other wars such as Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and Libya, all the other places that have suffered US interventions in recent years. Yet the media labels them all Syrian anyway to convince Europeans that this problem can be solved by intervention in Syria. They even go as far as to label sub-Saharan Africans as Syrian because they believe their viewers are too ignorant to notice the difference. How racist do you have to be to confuse Asia with Africa? The number of Syrian refugees is also being falsely conflated because other immigrants and refugees are simply claiming to be Syrian and throwing their original passports away. Pakistani and Bangladeshi passports are being found discarded near border crossings.
Population here, 29%.
We're just 4 Syrian.
We're just 4 Syrian people.
In Iraq.
25 in Iraq.
Iraq.
All the rest of them are Iraqi?
They said I don't have passport. I don't have anything to say who I am. So I'm Syrian. Where's your passport? I don't have because the government in Germany allowed everything for the Syrian people. You get help, you get money, you get food.
So it pays to be Syrian.
Yes. And some European politicians are exploiting the war in Syria to push for an open border immigration policy. So was it the Syrian government that caused these refugees? Or was it these same politicians and their liberal interventionists that are now crying over the refugees' deaths? People like Angelina Jolie, ironically the ambassador of the UN refugee program, caused these African refugees to drown off the coast of Libya because she supported the Libyan rebels who ethnically cleansed them. It was also Amnesty International who claimed Gaddafi was using black immigrants as mercenaries, which resulted in their ethnic cleansing. Now Amnesty International are raking in the donations over their deaths. It was these same liberal interventionists who in 2011 supported Al-Qaeda-affiliated rebels in Syria, and they dare yell, "Shame, shame, shame," for not letting in the Syrian refugees. How about shame on you for ruining our beautiful country? The refugee crisis didn't start when Syrians tried to cross into Europe, but when Europeans tried to cross into Syria to join ISIS. Syrians are being pushed out of their country while multinational Islamic State moves in from all over the world. But the so-called coalition on ISIS is a lie. The US and its allies have no intention of actually defeating ISIS. Instead of working with the Syrian army, the only force capable of fighting ISIS on the ground, they are preventing the Syrian army from doing their job. Only 4 years ago, Syria was a well-off and prosperous country that even accepted 2 million Iraqi refugees. Now, we've become the refugees. Syrian refugees want your help, yes, but to get back home to their own country. Almost half of Syria's population are refugees. 3 million outside of Syria, and 7 million of them are internally displaced inside Syria. Shouting refugees welcome, while well-meaning, is not enough. You're not going to be able to airlift 10 million Syrians into Europe. Displacing them further from their country is not ideal for anyone. The refugees want to come home.
I'm going to advise careful discernment when listening to the report from Syrian Girl. I do agree with her call to help refugees return home. I have stated that it is better for Western countries to end their invasion and give money to rebuild a country instead of displacing people and impacting economies of other countries. Although I want to believe that she is legitimate and what she is sharing is the truth, I am reminded of what happened during the Ukraine uprising. Listeners may recall a video that went viral of Yulia Marushevska called "I Am Ukrainian." The world fell for her beauty and her message. It was later revealed that the filmmakers had ties to cabal interests in the U.S., including U.S. aid. Marushevska became a poster girl for the Western message in Ukraine, and she was rewarded with scholarships to attend Stanford and Harvard universities, and was also given a speaking tour in the U.S. and Canada for her short video effort. According to a Wikipedia page about her, in June of 2015, the 24-year-old Marushevska joined the Odessa regional government team led by Mikhail Saakashvili, a former president of Georgia who was appointed a governor of the region. She was appointed ahead of a newly created investment agency of the Odessa regional government. Saakashvili is one of the appointments to the Ukrainian government made by the U.S., and the organization in Odessa sounds like a Ukrainian U.S. aid and is likely meant to help promote Western and European hegemony in the region. So when I see another young, good-looking woman suddenly rising to internet stardom, I have to at least wonder if there is something else behind it. I am not saying that this is the case, but this is why it is so important to advise discernment instead of immediately falling for a pretty face with what seems to be a good message. In the midst of all that is happening, there is, of course, the good news, and it is best to leave this story this week with some of the good things unfolding and to reassure people that there are good things happening to help move global change along. With the rising energies of human and planetary consciousness come also a rising compassion. With this compassion also comes the responsibility to expose what has happened so that actions can be taken to make the changes where people will not have to leave their countries, as Syrian Girl has shared. Austria was one of the countries that opened its borders, and many Austrians also opened their hearts in support of welcoming refugees. Melissa Fleming, speaking for the UN High Commission for Refugees, was interviewed at the train station in Vienna, Austria, about the actions of both the German and Austrian governments.
UNHCR really welcomes the move by Austria and Germany, the decision to open its borders and let thousands of refugees in who came across the border from Hungary last night. This was a move that was based on a leadership based on values, and we welcome this very much. What I'm really heartened to see, too, is the outpouring from civil society. I'm here at the train station in Vienna, and there are almost as many volunteers here as there are refugees arriving. What they're also saying to political leaders around the world is, we as the people, as the public, want to receive refugees. We want to welcome refugees, and we want to help them. And this is something that we're very encouraged by. But at the same time, it's very clear that this is not sustainable, that a country like Austria, that a country like Germany, countries like Sweden are taking in the majority of asylum seekers in Europe. This can't go on. We need an urgent action, urgent response by European leaders. UNHCR has made some proposals. We believe the numbers are manageable in a country as strong, as big, as a continent as strong, as big as Europe. The political will just needs to be there to do it.
Another piece of good news came in the form of news of the arrest and possible incarceration of a Hungarian journalist who was caught on film tripping a father holding his child and running from police. The woman was also filmed kicking other refugees. The Economic Times of India reported the journalist, identified as Petra Laszlo, as having been fired from her job. The article reports on a statement from the N1 TV network. An employee of N1 TV today showed unacceptable behavior at the Roshka collection point. N1 TV, also known as Nemzeti TV, said in a statement, "We have terminated the contract of the camera woman with immediate effect today." Jabosh Kisberg, chief editor of the TV station, told Reuters, "I believe we have done what we had to do in this situation. We don't understand how this could happen. It is shocking and unacceptable." The article noted that the station has aired anti-immigration programming, so this may give some indication from where the anti-immigrant sentiment came from within the journalist. The London Daily Mail reported on September the 8th that the journalist may now face a criminal prosecution for her actions. Another sign of good news comes from Greece. It is now being reported that Russia has begun flying humanitarian aid into Syria, causing the U.S. to begin pushing allies, such as Greece, to close its airspace to Russian flights. Sputnik News reported on September 6th that the government of Greece did not accept the U.S. calls and has thus far not agreed to close its airspace to Russian flights. There is another story surfacing this week. The Jerusalem Post reported on a CNN network story on September the 6th that Naguib Sawiris, a billionaire and philanthropist from Egypt, has announced a bid to purchase land in the Mediterranean which would be used to provide refugees a new home. Sawiris was asking Italy or Greece to sell him an island because Sawiris claimed that there are dozens of empty and available Greek or Italian islands that could easily handle 100 to 200,000 people. Sawiris was quoted as saying in the CNN story that it is a very simple solution. They sell me the island and I'll make a temporary shelter for these people. All I need is permission to put these people on this island. I don't need any more from them. I'll pay them for the island, I'll provide the jobs, I'll take care of the logistics, Sawiris said. He also plans to build a small port where boats can dock, and he will employ people to build their own homes and eventually a hotel. According to the article, Sawiris is one of Egypt's most well-known businessmen and the founder of a political party. Greek and Italian officials have yet to respond to his grandiose proposal. Said Sawiris, "Sometimes I think the politicians don't have a heart in regards to the lack of cohesive response from European leaders on how to deal with the influx of migrants." So the Times are bringing out the best in people while also seeking to expose all that has not worked in the past, allowing wonderful souls to set the example and raise the bar of being an exceptional human example in co-creating the world we are all claiming to want. In Canadian election news for this week, it seems the government of Prime Minister Stephen Harper has entered another stage of fear, so much so that according to an iPolitics article on September the 8th by Amanda Connolly, is reporting that the government has sent a warning to foreign diplomats, advising them to not get involved in the Canadian election. According to the article, the Canadian government has issued a warning to the heads of foreign diplomatic missions in Canada to keep their noses out of the country's federal election, and multiple ex-diplomats say they view the move as unprecedented and concerning. The note, dated July 16th and stamped with the seal of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development's Office of Protocol, asks that the heads of missions distribute it to all members of their teams and stresses that under the terms of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations and the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, they have a duty not to interfere in the internal affairs of the receiving state, namely in the then yet to be called federal election. The letter was dated before the election was actually called. Diplomatic and consular personnel are apparently forbidden from making financial contributions to candidates or political parties and directs people to one governmental department that offers guidelines that will help discern what is appropriate or not during an election period. Harper, via his Foreign Affairs Department, is advising staff from the diplomatic missions to Canada to not do the following: volunteering or fundraising for a candidate or political party, supporting or opposing a candidate or political party by displaying political material such as a picture, sticker, badge, or button, or placing a sign on the lawn, attending events, meetings, conventions, rallies, or other political gatherings in support of or in opposition to a candidate or political party, developing promotional material such as writing campaign speeches, slogans, and pamphlets for a candidate or political party, using blogs, social networking sites, or personal website or video sharing to express personal views in support of or in opposition to a candidate or political party. Connolly writes that the letter has many in Ottawa's diplomatic community concerned, with one saying it goes beyond the definition of acceptable behavior towards foreign missions. Lawrence Lederman, former Canadian Chief of Protocol, said he was disappointed but not surprised that the government would instruct the Office of Protocol to issue such a letter. "I have not seen any similar instruction during my tenure at Foreign Affairs," he said. "I find it in bad taste and can't understand why they decided to take this action. Rick Kohler, also a former Canadian chief of protocol, said the same thing. I had never seen such a message, he told iPolitics. On the other hand, this is the type of message quite typical of the attitude of the current folks, referring to the government. Several former Canadian diplomats were contacted for the article, and the article notes that none of the former diplomats contacted could point to a specific incident that may have inspired the wording in the letter, such as a foreign diplomat or consular official in Canada advocating for a candidate or supporting a political party. Also being reported this week is an article appearing on a political website called Think Poll. The article dated September the 11th highlights Harper's increasing desperation in hiring a temporary foreign worker tobacco lobbyist from Australia in violation of election law. According to the article, Stephen Harper has hired a temporary foreign worker known for lobbying against the introduction of plain packaging for cigarettes to lead the Conservatives' sagging campaign in violation of Canada's election law, which prohibit foreigners from influencing voters. The article reports Lynton Crosby as having helped both Australian former Prime Minister Howard and UK current Prime Minister David Cameron in their election campaigns. Tobacco company Philip Morris, owner of the Marlboro brand, hired Crosby's company to derail British government attempts to introduce plain packaging for cigarettes after it was found that plain packaging helped to make smoking less appealing. So it seems that Crosby has something that Harper desperately needs, and he is willing to break rules to get it. As Canadians are hopefully beginning to see, however, Harper is the kind of leader who feels that he is above the law and perhaps even above diplomatic protocol in his increasingly desperate desire to maintain his power in Canada. He is willing to tell diplomats and staff not to influence in the election against him, but he appears more than willing to hire foreigners to influence people's votes to get him elected. In financial news for the week, we start by looking at a story that is linked to some of the speculation circulating regarding alleged events that may take place during the month of September. The world is currently witnessing the extreme volatility in the stock markets of the world. Western pundits and media are attempting to blame this on China's instability, yet other sources suggest that recent bombings in China and also in Bangkok, Thailand, are linked to devaluations of local currencies as countries seek to find ways to offload massive U.S. Treasury debt ahead of what appears to be a growing consensus that the U.S. dollar, in its current form, will not be around for much longer. For those who are willing to dig a bit more deeply into the geoeconomic situation, they may discover that the reason Russia and China are being targeted in various ways at this time is because they are the countries leading the charge to abandon the use of the U.S. dollar as a middle currency for exchange in international deals. They are also the countries leading the charge in setting up banking institutions and financial payment institutions that operate outside of the controls and regulations of the international banking cartel and the U.S. Federal Reserve. We have been witnessing global events over the last year or so, especially of financial and political actions by many countries, including the BRICS alliance and former U.S. allies, that suggest that NATO and the U.S. are losing the ability to control the world financially, and they seem to be unable to start a global war despite numerous false flag attempts to instill fear into humans worldwide. An article appearing on the Wall Street Journal website on September the 6th suggests that a warning was given earlier this year as to some kind of strategic event that the Chinese government may be linked to that is now unfolding. The article by Lingling Wei writes that earlier this year, Zhao Zhaochuan, the governor of China's central bank, joined a chorus of official voices talking up the nation's stock markets as a way to help the economy. Now, after an epic bull run turned bust, Mr. Zhao is seeking to reassure the investing public again, saying the rout in the markets is nearing an end. The sentences are somewhat vague and could be interpreted in a context supporting the current dying financial paradigm, or the comments could imply a veiled disclosure that a change in the global financial paradigm is underway. The article continues. In remarks to central bankers and finance ministers from the group of 20 largest countries, who held 2 days of talks in Ankara, Turkey, Mr. Zhao said Saturday that the correction in the stock market is almost done. Moreover, the Chinese yuan is steadying after a devaluation last month, and that means China's financial markets are expected to become, quote-unquote, more stable, according to a statement posted on the website of the People's Bank of China. In trying to write this article for people attached to the old financial paradigm, the article also notes the following. The remarks come as investors and policymakers worldwide are becoming increasingly concerned about China's slowing growth. Turmoil in Chinese stocks that started mid-June, followed by the currency devaluation, spurred fears that the world's second-largest economy is on the verge of a much faster and deeper deceleration than Beijing is letting on, resulting in recurring currency, equity, and bond sell-offs in developing nations. The Western message describes the trend as China's slowing growth, or that China is on the verge of a much faster and deeper deceleration than Beijing is letting on. If worded in a different way, perhaps it might sound something like this. The remarks come as investors and policymakers worldwide observe China's movement away from a fiat currency system and the use of the US dollar as a global reserve currency. The corrections taking place in Chinese stocks that started in mid-June, followed by the currency devaluation, revealed that Beijing is on the verge of a much faster and deeper implementation of a new financial paradigm than Beijing is letting on, resulting in other countries following along. The article also adds the following. The Chinese central bank has been the driving force behind Beijing's effort to rescue the market. In the statement, Mr. Zhao said that it has provided liquidity to the market through various channels. The government's actions, Mr. Zhao said, prevented the stock market from falling off a cliff. If we were to reinterpret this paragraph, perhaps it might sound something like this. The Chinese central bank, through the purchase of massive amounts of gold reserves, has been the driving force behind Beijing's effort to transform the markets to the new paradigm. The government's actions prevented the stock market from experiencing what appears to be the repercussions coming from the rapid decline of the US dollar and fiat currency banking system. Concerning the devaluation, the article writes that the recent devaluation of the yuan, said Mr. Zhao, was aimed at bringing the Chinese currency's value more in line with its peers and giving market forces bigger sway in deciding its value. Despite increased pressure for the yuan to further depreciate following the devaluation, there is no basis for long-term depreciation of the Chinese currency. Interpreted another way, it might sound something like this. The recent devaluation of the yuan was a way for China to get an added bonus on the selling of worthless U.S. Treasury bonds, while forcing the U.S. dollar to rise and create the illusion in the Western world that the U.S. dollar is strong when the dollar is only hyperinflating and not responding to positive market actions. Despite increasing pressure on countries to offload their U.S. Treasury bond debt, there is no basis for long-term confidence and security in the U.S. dollar. Now, I am the first to acknowledge that I am not an expert in the interpretation of financial events, and the perspectives shared are my own and may or may not exactly be right on track with what is happening. From what I think I know at this time, This is what I appear to be observing, relative to the article written by Wei. It is an example of how we all must look more closely at what is written in Western world articles and to try to see between the lines what Western journalists are attempting or are being forced to communicate and what may be actually happening. In the minds of many, perhaps this month of September may help bring some degree of clarity to this understanding. It has now been reported on the BRICS Post on September the 5th that the new BRICS Monetary Fund is now fully operational. It is perhaps hardly a coincidence that the launching of this institution comes very neatly at the beginning of a month where numerous sources are expecting or speculating on one or more geopolitical and geoeconomic events that could have a significant impact on the current global financial paradigm. According to the article, the $100 billion BRICS Contingent Reserve Arrangement, or CRA, has become fully operational following the inaugural meeting of the BRICS CRA Board of Governors and the Standing Committee in the Turkish capital of Ankara. The first meetings of the governing bodies mark the start of a full-scale operation of the BRICS Contingent Reserve Arrangement as an international institution, with activities set to enhance and strengthen cooperation, said a Russian central bank statement on Friday. BRICS leaders Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Jacob Zuma, Narendra Modi, and Dilma Rousseff witnessed the signing of the agreement on the CRA in the Brazilian city of Fortaleza in July of 2014. The agreement entered into force on July 30th of this year. The CRA is meant to provide an alternative to International Monetary Fund's emergency lending. In the CRA, emergency loans of up to 30% of a member nation's contribution will be decided by a simple majority. Bigger loans will require the consent of all CRA members. As the BRICS countries launched new financial institutions like the $100 billion BRICS Bank, the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and a $100 billion BRICS Currency Reserve Fund, the IMF has, yet again, delayed voting reforms to give the emerging countries greater say within its institution. Finally, in health news, CVN has covered extensively the growing movement towards recognizing the benefits of cannabis as a healing plant. Those who profit from the system of commercial law have lobbied tirelessly over the years to criminalize the plant and prevent it from being used by humans. The main reason for this is because it is a natural plant and therefore cannot be patented for profit, and thus it was criminalized. Big Pharma was allowed to produce and sell synthetic and dangerous substitutes. Rick Simpson has been speaking out on the benefits of cannabis for years. He fled Canada some time ago to avoid prosecution by the Canadian government. In this interview with Mint Press TV, the reporter introduces some of the background and asks Simpson a few questions.
Ronald Reagan's war on drugs demonized marijuana use in the 1980s, but that legacy is dying, and medicinal cannabis is now at the center of a much-needed national dialogue about health, healing, and drug law reform. 23 states currently have approved cannabis for medicinal use, yet some restrictive state laws make it even more difficult for patients with autoimmune diseases to access the most powerful form of this medicine, CBD-rich, pure cannabis oil. Now, despite the legalization movement's progress, the federal government continues to classify cannabis as a Schedule I drug, the same category as heroin and bath salts. Yet research shows that cannabinoids can help treat the effects of a number of illnesses ranging from epileptic seizures to Crohn's disease to nausea brought on by chemotherapy. And CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta and the Department of Health's own National Cancer Institute have both acknowledged that research shows cannabis can be effective in fighting cancer. Now, whether it is chemotherapy or CBD oil, no treatment will work the same way for every individual. But shouldn't the gravely ill have the freedom to choose what medicine they use? Considering the potential for cannabis to harbor medicinal powers that might work where pharmaceuticals have failed, why isn't the government doing more to investigate cannabis-based therapies? And why isn't Big Pharma rejoicing at the rediscovery of a plant that could alleviate so much suffering and death? Well, Rick Simpson, a medicinal cannabis activist and founder of Phoenix Tears, has become one of the world's most vocal advocates for repealing all medical marijuana laws and at the center of several documentaries about cannabis. Simpson's organization, Phoenix Tears, is a service that actually gives away CBD oil. They offer extraction and production instructions to use to heal your body from minor cuts and burns to cancer. He argues that people should have the right to choose between man-made chemical pharmaceuticals and a plant that has been used throughout history to heal. Now, religious figures like Jesus Christ, Moses, and even Imam Ali Riza are all said to have harnessed the healing powers of cannabis. Take a look. So Rick, my first question is directed towards the pharmaceutical industry specifically. What role do you think that the pharmaceutical industry plays in our understanding of the healing power of medicinal cannabis?
Well, I mean, it's the big money interests that own the pharmaceutical industry, and practically everything else is causing this. I mean, they're the ones that caused it right from the beginning. If you go and look at the Corbett Report, episode 286, you'll find that it's called Rockefeller Medicine. If you watch that report, I think it'll explain why we have this horrible medical system we have today. And I look at the pharmaceutical industry as being nothing more than gangsters. I mean, they've been killing us with chemicals and poisons, radiation, chemotherapy, and all of their wonderful CAT scans and PET scans. These are all harmful. And they have caused the death of many people. So I just am truly disgusted, with the practice of medicine today. And I think it's just about time that doctors got back to reality and started using, natural substances like this, the extracts from the cannabis plant, and then they could at least follow their Hippocratic oath, which states, first do no harm, and I shall not administer poisons. So I think it's time that the doctors of today started following that sacred oath.
What does the research that has been conducted on cannabinoids show?
Well, the research that's available today is definitely proving everything I've been saying about this. But, if you go on YouTube, you'll see hundreds and hundreds, of different testimonials up there from people who were suffering from all kinds of different conditions. But yet, the authorities ignore this. These people have medical records proving that they did have these illnesses. So where have these illnesses gone? And how were they cured? Could it be the extract that they said they used? It's just ridiculous the way this is being approached. And I think, definitely there's more research to be done, but we need some legitimate research. They've been withholding the simple truth about the healing powers, of these cannabinoids from the public for over 40 years now. And sadly, all of these researchers we have today, and there are many who I consider to be experts, but the problem is, they couldn't come forward and bring the public the truth. Because if they had tried to do so, they would have been ostracized and their careers would have been ruined. The big money is famous for doing that. But when it comes to someone like me, they couldn't threaten me by saying they were going to take my children, because my children are all grown up. And the bottom line is, this oil saved my life. And I will never stop speaking the truth about, what I've seen it do. It literally is a cure-all. I used to mix different oils or different extracts from many different strains, like the heavy sedated indica varieties. That's what you really need to produce the medicine properly. And when you mix all of these different extracts, well, each strain, they all have different healing abilities. So when you mix the extracts from many strains, you're basically creating a cure-all. And I really think that there is no medicine on earth like this. because you can take this medicine to prevent disease, you can take the medicine to fight disease also. And our bodies are designed. You know, we have an endocannabinoid system with CV1 and CV2 receptors. Our bodies are designed to take this medicine. So how dare anyone, stand up and tell us that we do not have the right? We have the natural right to heal ourselves, and we always have. And cannabis, if you look at the history of this plant, man's oldest known and safest medication, outlawed. Well, outlawed by who and for what reason?
And we have veterans who suffer from PTSD who are committing suicide at 22 per day. Instead, they're prescribed a long list of neurotoxic and addictive prescription antidepressants. And other advocates are even calling having access to these medicines as a human right now. What needs to be done to reform these cannabis laws across the United States?
These laws worldwide need to be repealed in every country. I mean, we all know that, all of these laws and regulations and acts, they were all put in place with the use of corruption. There's not a shred of truth in it. So why are we following these absurd laws? And I mean, there are many outfits out there, like Normal, who pretend to be, trying to get cannabis legalized. Well, I mean, Normal is made up, basically, it's run by lawyers. But yet all these legal eagles, who've been fighting for this cause for 40 years now, are unable to get rid of a law which in reality does not even exist. So I don't really think they've been trying too hard, but they've been making a lot of money pretending they are. I think it's just about time the human race grew up and started looking at things, for what they really are. We've all been misled and we've been simply scammed. Now, here's a natural medicine that we can all grow and produce ourselves. Now, I'm not saying we don't need doctors. I mean, if you have an injury, a broken leg, a car accident, then you need someone to help put you back together. That end of medicine is okay. But as far as the other end of medicine, the pill pushers and the oncologists, they're nothing but frauds.
The link to the full 15-minute interview can be found in the show summary for those wishing to hear more. If I may make a request at this time, I would like to ask if there are any CVN listeners who are extensive business travelers and who may be willing to donate some frequent flyer points for the purposes of possibly taking a trip to Canada in early October. The plans for this trip will depend upon whatever happens on the geoeconomic scene over the next few weeks. However, if the trip does go ahead, it is my hope to travel on the 29th or 30th of September, or the latest, October the 1st. I would be looking to stay for about 2 to 3 weeks and then return back to Sweden. The trip is not an urgent one, but there are a few things that I would like to attend that feel important to me at this time. I can be contacted through the CVN website, cosmicvisionnews.com, or through the email info@cosmicvisionnews.com. In this week's final words, given the fact that the newscast comes on September the 11th, it is perhaps appropriate that we focus on creating ways of stepping beyond anything that is connected to energies of negativity. We close this week with a recent segment from Daryl Anka and a galactic entity named Bashar. In this clip, some highlights from a presentation entitled The Black Box. And the YouTube page describes the video as follows. In these 3 transmissions, or what will be a summary of these transmissions, Bashar will prepare you with the necessary tools to navigate the period of rapid change that will occur in these next 2 critical years of 2015 and 2016, providing you with a link and a bridge to a new time on Earth. Use these tools to become your highest vibration. For those who choose to reject the idea of a channeled message, this is perfectly okay, although I invite those individuals to focus more on the message and not focus on the source. Create a wonderful week. Until our next moment of now, here is Daryl Anka and Bashar.
Negative beliefs have to rely on a series of tricks and tools. They have to specifically target certain ideas and experiences within you and magnify, amplify, get you to focus on them in a very specific way in order for you to actually even let go of the notion that you are this worthy being and actually convince you that you're not worthy, convince you that life is a struggle, convince you that things aren't easy. Because you know deep down they actually are. You know deep down in your natural self that things are very simple. Let us begin to examine some of those tools and tricks and expand upon them a little bit further so that you can really lock into this idea. What is the first tool, Nania?
Convince you no other belief is as real.
All right, so we have touched on this a little bit. One of the first things that a negative belief must do to get you to stop looking elsewhere for an idea is convince you that they are really representative of reality and everything else is a fantasy.
Distract you from investigating your beliefs.
Oh, that's a big one too. Yes, yes, I am going to go about investigating those... Ooh, shiny. Oh, what was I doing? Oh, yes, yes, I'm going to get to the bottom of these Oh, that looks like fun. The negative belief will do that too. Look at that. Oh, look at that. You've been wanting to do that for a while, right? I'm your pal. I'm your buddy. Let's go do that. That looks like much more fun than looking for me. It will do anything it can to prolong the process, in other words.
Convince you to feel comfortable with negativity.
Oh yes, if you live with it long enough and it has done its job to scare you that every other direction is going to be worse, then you will settle down into that couch and it will start to eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat away at you very slowly over time until you find that you and the couch have fused into one thing. And now if you want to go and do something, now it's convinced you that you really can't even move because now not only do you have the weight of your own self, but you have the weight of the couch. And now the couch has fused to the floor of the house. And now you really can't do anything about it, so you might as well just stay there and enjoy it. Enjoy wallowing in your misery. This is what happens when you call it wallowing in misery. You just give up, give over all your power, and this is just the way it is, and you just fade away.
Convince you to distort and view positive information as negative.
Again, a variation of the idea of positive beliefs, where again it won't even allow you to actually comprehend some of the information that you are receiving that could be helping you move in a positive direction. It will distort it, filter it, twist it in such a way that you will really see it as something other than what it is, and again, not be capable of taking advantage of the positive information. It will make it seem discordant. Because you are in a negative state, out of alignment, out of phase with your true vibration, anytime the true vibration approaches you, it will get louder too and create such a cacophony of distortion. It will then make your ears bleed to listen to it, so you'll move away from that positive information. It will make it seem that you are so vibrationally incompatible with that it must be a bad thing, because you are wonderful and you are good, and anything coming to you that makes you feel this way must be bad. So please ignore it. Please run away from it as fast as you possibly can back into my arms, where you are nice and safe and cozy forever. Shall we go down the list quickly of the neutralizers?
Yes, we shall. Remembering that all situations are fundamentally neutral.
And again, notice how all of or most of these neutralizers have to do with just remembering these ideas. That's all. And again, remember that the negative belief is going to do its darndest to get you to forget. To get you to not realize that there are such concepts. Remember, we said it will paint these things as if it's something to not pay attention to. So, in a fact, The idea of just remembering some of these ideas can, in many cases, be enough to neutralize them just because you broke through the forgetfulness the negative belief was intending to impose upon your consciousness.
Yeah, and if you find that you are experiencing fear, push through the fear. Even though it'll get louder and stronger, that only means it's reaching its breaking point, and eventually it will dissolve.
As we said, negative beliefs have to work very hard to get your attention, to turn your face away from the truth that you're absolutely worthy. So as soon as you start moving in the positive direction, they're going to start yelling as loud as they can. They're going to start banging on drums. They're going to have a 76-piece orchestra trying to get your attention so that you will come back in that direction. So the louder it gets, the stronger the fear feels, should tell you you're really close to crossing the threshold and letting it go, or it wouldn't have to work so hard to get your attention.
So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary, which is also on the website. CVN can be followed through the CVN Facebook page, Seen page, and YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that what makes you truly powerful is not the extent of control you have on your external world, but rather the depth of connection you have with your inner world. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.